The massive chamber on Nexus Prime buzzed with dozens of alien voices. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their floating chairs, their strange forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Admiral Kethavar stood at the center podium, his blue skin gleaming under the bright lights. His forearms moved as he spoke, pointing to the holographic display above them. "Fellow council members," Kethavar said in his deep voice, "today we discuss the planet known as Sol 3, or as its inhabitants call it, Earth." A wave of laughter rippled through the chamber. The Zephyrian delegate made a whistling sound that served as their species' chuckle. "You mean those hairless apes who just figured out how to leave their own star system?" "The same ones," Kethavar confirmed. "Our scouts report they have established exactly 12 colonies in nearby systems. 12. My own species had conquered 50 worlds before we even developed proper fusion drives." More laughter filled the air. The Crystalline Collective's representative spoke with a voice like breaking glass. "What weapons do they possess? Surely nothing that could threaten civilized space." Kethavar manipulated the hologram, showing images of human ships. They looked crude and boxy compared to the sleek vessels of the advanced races. Kinetic weapons, mostly. Some primitive energy weapons. Their largest warship carries maybe 300 beings. Our smallest patrol craft could destroy it without effort. "Then why are we even discussing them?" asked the Hive Queen's speaker. "If they are so primitive, we simply take what we need and relocate the population." "Exactly my thoughts," Kethavar agreed. "Earth sits on several valuable trade routes. The planet itself has good water and mineral resources. The beings there could provide useful labor once properly trained." He changed the display to show Earth itself, a blue and green marble spinning slowly in space. Current population is approximately 8 billion. We estimate we could relocate them to work colonies within 6 months. The operation would be simple and profitable. Around the chamber, heads nodded in agreement. This was standard procedure for the Galactic Council. They had done this hundreds of times before with primitive species. Sometimes the locals resisted, but it never lasted long against superior technology. "Have they attempted any contact with the greater galactic community?" asked the Tentacled One's representative. "They have sent out basic radio signals," Kethavar replied. "Nothing sophisticated. They seem unaware that intelligent life exists beyond their small corner of space. This makes the operation even simpler." The Metallic Brotherhood's delegate stood up with a sound like grinding gears. "What timeline do we propose for annexation?" "I suggest we begin within the next Galactic Standard Month," Kethavar said. "A show of force should be sufficient. Once they see our ships, they will understand the futility of resistance." "Agreed," came voices from around the chamber. The vote was taken quickly. 37 species voted in favor of annexation. None voted against. It was, as Kethavar had said, a routine decision. But in the shadows at the back of the chamber, one figure did not participate in the vote. Elder Zixmoth of the Archive Collective sat perfectly still, his ancient form wrapped in dark robes. While the others laughed and planned, something nagged at his old mind. The name Earth seemed familiar somehow, though he could not place why. As the meeting continued, Zixmoth's thoughts drifted to the deep archives on his homeworld. The Archive Collective was the galaxy's memory keeper. They stored information going back millions of years, far longer than any other species' records. If there was something important about this planet Earth, the archives would know. "Elder Zixmoth," Kethavar called out, noticing the archivist's silence. "Does your collective have any historical data on this Sol 3 system?" Zixmoth's head turned slowly toward the Admiral. His voice was like rustling papers when he spoke. "The archives contain much information. I will need to review our records thoroughly." "Of course," Kethavar said dismissively, "though I doubt you will find anything significant. These humans have barely discovered fire, relatively speaking." The meeting moved on to other business. Trade disputes between the Ceramic Empire and the Gas Giant Federation. Border adjustments in the Spiral Arm territories. Routine matters for a galaxy-spanning government. But Zixmoth remained troubled. As the session ended and delegates began to file out, he approached Kethavar directly. "Admiral," he said quietly, "I recommend caution regarding this Earth matter." Kethavar looked surprised. "Caution? Elder, we are discussing a primitive world with basic chemical rockets. What possible threat could they pose?" "Perhaps none," Zixmoth replied. "But the archives exist for a reason. Some knowledge is too dangerous to lose, even about seemingly insignificant worlds." With respect to your great age and wisdom, Kethvar said, his tone becoming slightly mocking. I think you worry too much about ancient history. The present situation is clear. These humans are primitive and weak. They will submit to proper galactic authority like all the others. Sixmoth said nothing more, but his ancient eyes remained troubled. As the chamber emptied, he began planning his return to the archive worlds. Something about the name Earth, about the way it sat in his mind, demanded investigation. Kethvar, meanwhile, began making plans for the annexation fleet. 3 battle groups should be more than sufficient, he decided. Perhaps even excessive for such a backward world. But the Council liked decisive action, and a quick victory would look good on his record. He pulled up star charts of the Sol system, studying the primitive human colonies. 12 worlds barely defended, probably with populations in the thousands. The humans had spread themselves thin across multiple systems, classic mistake of a species that did not understand real warfare. Computer, he commanded, prepare fleet formation 7 Alpha for immediate deployment to the Sol system. Authorization Kethvar Prime Command. Acknowledged, the computer replied. Estimated arrival time in Sol system, 15 standard days. Kethvar smiled with satisfaction. In 2 weeks this Earth problem would be solved, and the hegemony would control valuable new territory. The humans would learn their place in the galactic order, just like every other primitive species before them. What none of them knew, as they made their plans and prepared their fleets, was that across the galaxy, automated systems were beginning to stir. Deep space monitoring stations that had been silent for millennia were suddenly coming online. Ancient codes dormant for 10,000 years were being activated. On Earth itself, in a bunker deep beneath the moon's surface, an old man sat at a desk covered with reports. Admiral Morrison had been waiting for this day his entire life, just as his father had and his father before him. The call would come soon, he knew. The galaxy was about to remember why they had once feared the name Earth. But that knowledge belonged to another part of the story, one that the Galactic Council was about to discover in the most unpleasant way possible. The archive world of Memoriam floated in the depths of space like a massive library made of crystal and metal. Elder Zixmoth moved through its endless corridors, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He had not slept since returning from the council meeting. Something about Earth would not leave his thoughts alone. The central archive chamber stretched beyond sight in all directions. Millions of data crystals glowed softly on the walls, each one containing thousands of years of galactic history. Zixmoth approached the main interface, a pillar of living light that responded to his touch. Archive. He spoke to the ancient computer. Search all records for references to the planet designation Earth, also known as Sol 3. The pillar flickered as vast databases searched through eons of stored information. Search complete. 17,400,000 references found. Most recent entries relate to current Galactic Council discussions. Filter results. Show only entries older than 5,000 years. Search refined. 4,700 references found. Older than 10,000 years. 200 references found. Zixmoth felt his ancient heart beating faster. Why would there be so many old references to a supposedly primitive world? Display the oldest reference. A hologram appeared before him, showing text in a language so old that even his trained mind had to work to translate it. The words seemed to crawl across his vision like living things. Warning, the text read. The Voidwalker homeworld has been located. Designation, Terra Prime, also called Earth by its inhabitants. Recommend immediate quarantine of entire system. These beings must never be allowed to return to galactic space. Zixmoth stared at the words, feeling ice form in his veins. The Voidwalkers. He had thought them legend, stories told to frighten young archivists, tales of warriors who could walk through space itself, who fought with such fury that entire civilizations surrendered rather than face them in battle. Archive. Display next chronological entry. Another hologram appeared, this one showing a star map with a system marked in pulsing red. Quarantine established around Sol system. All hyperspace routes have been redirected. Navigation computers galaxy-wide have been updated to mark this region as empty space. The location of Terra Prime must be forgotten. More entries followed, each one adding to the horrifying picture. The Voidwalkers had not been destroyed or conquered. They had been too dangerous for that. Instead, the combined might of the ancient galaxy had worked together to hide them away, to make the universe forget they existed. Archive, show me warfare records from this period. The display changed to show battle reports that made Zixmoth's blood run cold. Fleets of millions of ships reduced to wreckage by hundreds of human vessels. Entire star systems evacuated when a single human ship appeared on sensors. Death tolls that seemed impossible. The enemy does not fight for territory or resources, one report stated. They fight for the joy of battle itself. Surrender is not an option they offer. Victory is not a concept they understand. They simply continue until everything that opposes them is dead. Another report showed images that Zixmoth could barely comprehend. Humans in what looked like simple spacesuits, walking on the hulls of enemy ships while in the vacuum of space. Boarding parties that cut through armor with their bare hands. Soldiers who kept fighting even when missing limbs or suffering wounds that should have killed them instantly. How is this possible? Zixmoth whispered to himself. The archive provided more data. Human genetic modifications that had turned them into living weapons. Technology that merged flesh and machine in ways that violated every known law of biology. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to target. But the most chilling entry was a personal log from Admiral Thex Cole of the combined fleet. Written just before the final push to quarantine Earth. "We have won," the log began, but not in any way that feels like victory. The Voidwalkers have agreed to contain themselves within their home system. They will not venture into galactic space if we leave them alone. This is not surrender on their part. This is mercy. They could continue fighting, could probably destroy us all eventually. But they choose not to. I do not understand why, and I pray to my ancestors that I never have to. Zixmoth realized his hands were shaking as he read. The galaxy had not defeated humanity. Humanity had allowed itself to be contained for reasons known only to them. Archive, show me the final quarantine protocols. What he saw made him stumble backward. The quarantine was not just about redirecting ships or hiding navigation data. Reality itself had been altered around the Sol system. Space was folded so that the most direct routes to Earth led nowhere. Hyperspace lanes were twisted into loops that dumped travelers back where they started. The combined psychic might of hundreds of species had been used to make the universe itself forget that Earth existed. The cost of maintaining this quarantine, the final report stated, requires the constant effort of our greatest minds. But it is a cost we must pay. The Voidwalkers cannot be allowed to return. They are evolution taken too far. Adaptation pushed beyond all reasonable limits. They are what a species becomes when it chooses war as its path to perfection. Zixmoth sat heavily in his chair, the weight of the discovery crushing down on him. The humans that the Galactic Council was planning to conquer were not primitive apes who had barely reached the stars. They were the descendants of the most feared warriors in galactic history. But wait, if Earth was hidden, if the quarantine still held, how are the humans expanding into normal space? He searched for more recent data, looking for any signs that the ancient barriers were failing. What he found was worse than he had imagined. The quarantine was not breaking down. It was being systematically dismantled from the inside. Someone with perfect knowledge of how it worked was taking it apart piece by piece, careful not to trigger any alarms until it was too late. The Voidwalkers were not escaping their prison. They were unlocking it. Archive, scan recent galactic communications for any mention of unusual space phenomena near the Sol system. The results appeared immediately. Reports of navigation errors that brought ships to the edge of Sol space. Equipment malfunctions that revealed Earth on sensors for brief moments. Computer glitches that showed inhabited worlds where the star chart said there was only empty space. The humans were letting themselves be discovered. They wanted the galaxy to find them. Zixmoth reached for his communication device with trembling fingers. He had to warn the council, had to make them understand what they were walking into. But as he began to compose the message, another thought struck him. What if it was already too late? What if the humans wanted the galaxy to attack them? What if this was all part of some vast plan that had been in motion for thousands of years? He looked at the archive data again, studying the old reports more carefully. Hidden in the technical descriptions was a pattern he had missed before. The Voidwalkers had not just fought battles. They had enjoyed them. They had sought out stronger opponents, had pushed themselves against greater challenges. What if 10,000 years of isolation had not weakened them, but made them hungry? What if they had spent all that time preparing, evolving, waiting for the day when the galaxy would come to them again? The communication device fell from his nerveless fingers. Across the galaxy, Admiral Kethvar was preparing his fleets for what he thought would be an easy conquest. He was about to give the Voidwalkers exactly what they had been waiting for: a war. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, watching the stars through the main viewport. The ship looked simple from the outside, just another human exploration vessel making its way through space. But Sarah knew better. Hidden beneath the plain metal hull were weapons and systems that would make the finest alien warships look like children's toys. "Captain," Lieutenant Martinez called from the communication station, "we're receiving a transmission on all frequencies. It's from something called the Galactic Council." Sarah turned toward him with a slight smile. "Put it on screen, Lieutenant. Let's see what they have to say." The main display flickered to life, showing Admiral Kethvar in his fancy uniform. His forearms moved as he spoke, trying to look impressive and important. "Attention, primitive inhabitants of Sol 3, his voice boomed through the bridge. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the Galactic Hegemony, speaking for the Galactic Council. Your species has been selected for relocation to provide useful labor for civilized space. You will surrender immediately and prepare for peaceful transfer to designated work colonies." Several crew members on the bridge started chuckling. Sarah raised her hand for silence. Kethvar continued, "Any resistance will be met with pacification forces. You have one planetary rotation to signal your surrender. Failure to comply will result in the immediate occupation of your worlds." The transmission ended. The bridge fell quiet for a moment before someone started laughing out loud. Soon the entire crew was laughing, the sound echoing through the ship. "Labor colonies," Weapons Officer Thompson said, wiping tears from his eyes. "They want to put us in labor colonies." "Should we tell them who we are, Captain?" asked Navigator Park. Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. First, we follow protocol. Martinez, open a channel to Earth Command." The main screen changed to show a deep underground chamber filled with control stations and displays. Admiral Morrison sat at the center command chair, his gray hair and lined face making him look like any other elderly human. But his eyes held the same dangerous light that Sarah knew was in her own. "Admiral," Sarah reported, "the aliens have made their demand. Complete surrender and relocation to work camps." Morrison nodded slowly. "Any sign they know what they're dealing with?" "None, sir. They still think we're primitive. Their fleet is 3 days out from Earth." 3 days, Morrison repeated, looking thoughtful. "That gives us time to prepare properly. How many ships are they bringing?" "Our scouts report 3 battle groups, approximately 400 vessels total." Morrison actually smiled at that. 400 ships to conquer humanity. They really don't know, do they? "No, sir. Orders?" The Admiral's expression became serious. "Signal Phase 1 activation to all human worlds. Bring the hidden fleets online. Wake up the deep systems. And Sarah?" "Yes, sir?" "When you engage them, make sure a few survive to carry word back. The galaxy needs to remember what happens when you threaten Earth." Sarah nodded. "Understood, Admiral." Indomitable out, the connection ended. Around her, the bridge crew was already moving to their tasks. But these were not the tasks of a normal space crew. Martinez was not just a communications officer. He was a gene-modified human whose nervous system could interface directly with quantum communication arrays. Thompson was not just a weapons officer. Her body contained enough military-grade nanotechnology to function as a living weapon. "All hands," Sarah announced over the ship's communication system. "Prepare for combat operations. Authorization code Voidwalker 77 Alpha." Throughout the ship, systems that had been hidden or disguised began to reveal their true nature. Walls slid away to show weapon systems that should not have been able to fit in the available space. The ship's simple fusion reactor shut down as something far more advanced took its place. The Indomitable began to change, unfolding like a mechanical flower. In space around Earth, similar transformations were taking place. What had looked like simple asteroid mining stations suddenly bristled with weapons. Cargo ships shed their false hulls to reveal sleek warships underneath. Hidden bases on moons and in asteroid belts came online for the first time in decades. But the most dramatic change was on Earth itself. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, something vast began to stir. The Kraken base had been sleeping for 50 years, its existence known to only a handful of humans. Now it rose from the ocean floor, water cascading from its hull as it emerged into the sunlight for the first time in half a century. Similar scenes played out around the solar system. On Mars, the entire North Polar ice cap slid aside to reveal a shipyard that had been building in secret for generations. In the asteroid belt, rocks that had been floating peacefully suddenly activated drive systems and began moving into formation. Admiral Morrison watched it all from his command center, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. Humanity had been preparing for this day for 10,000 years. Every generation had passed down the knowledge, had maintained the hidden fleets, had kept the old skills alive. They had pretended to be primitive explorers while secretly remaining the most advanced military force in the galaxy. All fleets report ready. Admiral, his aide reported. Morrison looked at the tactical display showing human forces throughout the solar system. 500 capital ships, 2,000 heavy cruisers, 10,000 fighters, and support vessels beyond counting. All of them hidden until this moment. All of them crewed by humans who had been born and trained for war. Signal the colonies, Morrison ordered. Tell them it's time. The long wait is over. On 12 human worlds, colonists who had been playing the role of simple farmers and miners began revealing their true nature. Hidden weapon platforms emerged from underground bunkers. Orbital defenses that had been disguised as communication satellites armed themselves for battle. But perhaps most importantly, the humans themselves began to change. Genetic modifications that had been suppressed for decades reactivated themselves. Military implants came online. Combat drugs began flowing through bloodstreams that had been designed to process them efficiently. The humans that the Galactic Council thought they were conquering were about to remember what they really were. Captain Chen felt the familiar rush as her own. Modifications activated. Her bones became denser, her muscles stronger, her reflexes faster. Information flowed directly into her brain from the ship's computers. She could feel the indomitable around her like it was part of her own body. All stations report ready. Captain, Martinez announced. Sarah looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere among them, alien ships were approaching with the intention of enslaving her people. She felt sorry for them. They had no idea what they were about to face. Set course for the outer system, she ordered. Let's go meet our guests. As the Indomitable moved away from Earth, its true form fully revealed, it no longer looked like any human ship the aliens had seen in their scouting reports. It looked like what it was, a vessel designed by a species that had turned warfare into an art form, crewed by beings who had been shaped by evolution and technology into perfect soldiers. The galaxy was about to receive a very unpleasant reminder of why they had once been so afraid of the humans that they had hidden them away at the edge of space. The Voidwalkers were coming home. Admiral Kethavar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the dominant force, watching the approaching Sol system with satisfaction. His fleet moved through space in perfect formation, 400 ships representing the finest military technology of a dozen species. The primitive humans would see this display of power and immediately surrender. It always worked that way. Admiral, his sensor officer reported, we are detecting some unusual readings from the inner system. Define unusual, Kethavar said without much interest. He was busy reviewing the plans for Earth's occupation. Energy signatures that don't match our intelligence reports. The planet appears to have significantly more industrial activity than expected. Kethavar frowned and walked over to the sensor station. The display showed Earth as a glowing blue dot surrounded by what looked like a cloud of smaller objects. Orbital facilities, he said. More developed than we thought, but still primitive. Probably mining stations and simple habitats. Sir, the officer continued hesitantly, some of these readings suggest very advanced technology. Power outputs comparable to our own ships. Impossible, Kethavar snapped. Our scouts have been watching the system for months. These humans have barely achieved fusion power. But even as he spoke, something was bothering him. The formations around Earth did look unusually organized for a primitive species, and there were far more ships moving around than their intelligence had suggested. Sir, the communications officer called out. We're receiving a transmission from an unknown vessel. It's on an intercept course. On the main screen, a ship appeared that made Kethavar blink in confusion. It was clearly of human design, but it looked nothing like the crude vessels his scouts had reported. This ship was sleek and deadly, bristling with weapon systems that seemed almost organic in their integration with the hull. A human female appeared on the screen. She wore a simple uniform, but something about her made Kethvar feel uncomfortable. Her eyes held the look of a predator sizing up prey. "Admiral Kethvar," she said in perfect galactic standard, though with an accent he couldn't place. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Indomitable. We need to talk." "There is nothing to discuss," Kethvar replied, trying to sound commanding. "You will surrender immediately or face the consequences." Captain Chen smiled, and the expression sent chills down Kethvar's spine. "I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation, Admiral. You are trespassing in human space. Turn around and leave, and we won't destroy your fleet." Laughter erupted on Kethvar's bridge. The idea that one primitive human ship could threaten a galactic battle fleet was absurd. "Captain," Kethvar said, "you are vastly outnumbered. We have 400 warships. You have one." "Actually," Chen replied, still smiling, "we have quite a few more than that." The space around Kethvar's fleet suddenly filled with new contacts. Ships materialized out of nowhere, appearing from stealth fields that should not have been possible with human technology. Hundreds of vessels, each one radiating power signatures that made his sensors scream warnings. "Impossible," Kethvar whispered. "You've been watching us for months," Chen continued conversationally, "but you've only been seeing what we wanted you to see. Did you really think a species capable of interstellar travel would be as primitive as we appeared?" More ships kept appearing, not just around Earth, but throughout the solar system. The asteroid belt lit up with hidden bases. Mars revealed orbital shipyards that dwarfed anything in civilized space. Even the gas giant Jupiter sprouted defensive platforms that had been hiding in its storm clouds. "This is your last warning," Chen said. "Leave now, or we will consider your presence an act of war." Kethvar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all staring at the tactical display in shock. What had seemed like a simple conquest was rapidly becoming a nightmare, but he was Admiral Kethvar of the Galactic Hegemony. He did not retreat from primitive worlds no matter how many ships they had hidden. "All ships," he commanded. "Open fire. Destroy the humans." The battle began with a thunderous exchange of energy weapons. Kethvar's ships unleashed everything they had, filling space with deadly beams and explosions. For a moment he thought they might still win through sheer firepower. Then the humans started shooting back. Kethvar had seen many space battles in his long career, but nothing had prepared him for this. Human weapons didn't just destroy their targets. They seemed to reach inside ships and tear them apart from within. Enemy vessels simply stopped existing, their crews dead before they even knew they were under attack. "How are they doing that?" his weapons officer screamed over the noise of battle. Kethvar didn't have an answer. The human weapons seemed to ignore shields and armor entirely. Ships that should have taken minutes to destroy were dying in seconds. But worse than the weapons were the humans themselves. Boarding pods launched from their ships and attached to galactic vessels with magnetic clamps. When the pods opened, the things that came out barely looked human anymore. They wore armor that seemed to be part of their bodies. They moved through the vacuum of space as easily as walking through air, and when they reached the airlocks of galactic ships, they didn't bother trying to cut through. They simply punched holes in the metal with their bare hands. "Sir," his security chief reported, "we have boarders on deck 7 through 12. Our security teams are being overwhelmed." "How many boarders?" "6, sir." Kethvar stared at him. "6 humans are overwhelming our entire security force?" Before the security chief could answer, the bridge doors exploded inward. Through the smoke came 3 figures in powered armor that moved like living things. They didn't carry weapons because they didn't need to. Their hands had been replaced with claws that could cut through any known material. The lead figure removed her helmet, revealing a human face that was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Genetic modifications had enhanced every aspect of her being, turning her into something that was more than human but still recognizably so. "Admiral Kethvar," she said in a voice like silk over steel. "You should have listened to Captain Chen." Kethvar reached for his sidearm, but the human woman moved faster than his eyes could follow. One moment she was across the bridge from him. The next her hand was around his throat. "Your fleet is destroyed," she told him calmly. 90% casualties in the first 10 minutes of battle. The survivors are being allowed to retreat so they can carry word back to your Galactic Council." Kethvar looked at the tactical display and saw that she was right. His proud fleet was nothing but wreckage floating in space. Only a handful of ships remained intact, and they were fleeing as fast as their engines could carry them. "Impossible," he gasped. Your people used to know better, the human said. 10,000 years ago they knew what we were capable of. But memories fade and legends become stories and stories become myths. You forgot why your ancestors hid us away. She released his throat and stepped back. We are not the primitives you thought we were, Admiral. We are the species that once conquered half this galaxy. We are the Voidwalkers, the nightmare your grandparents' used to whisper about in the dark. But why? Kethavar managed to ask. Why pretend to be primitive? Why hide your true capabilities? The human smiled again, and this time Kethavar saw something in her expression that made his blood freeze. It was not anger or hatred. It was joy. Pure, terrifying joy. Because we wanted you to come to us, she said. We've been waiting for 10,000 years for the galaxy to find us again. Waiting for someone to give us a reason to remember what we are. She gestured to the wreckage of his fleet. Thank you for that reminder, Admiral. It has been far too long since we had a proper war. As Kethavar watched in horror, the human boarding teams began systematically destroying his ship's systems. But they left the life support intact, and they left enough engine power for the ship to limp home. Tell your Galactic Council, the human said as she put her helmet back on, that Earth remembers. Tell them the Voidwalkers have returned. Tell them that if they want war, we will give them more war than they can imagine. She paused at the broken bridge doors and looked back at him, and tell them that this was just a greeting. Next time we won't be so gentle. The boarding teams left as quickly as they had come, returning to their own ships. Kethavar was left with a crippled vessel, a dead crew, and the knowledge that he had just witnessed the return of the galaxy's greatest nightmare. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Half the member species had already recalled their ambassadors and were fleeing to their homeworlds. The remaining delegates sat in stunned silence as Admiral Kethavar finished his report. His once proud form was now broken and bandaged. His forearms hung uselessly at his sides, and his voice was barely a whisper. The human boarding teams had left him alive, but they had made sure he would never forget what they were capable of. 400 ships, he repeated for the third time. Gone in 10 minutes. The humans didn't just defeat us. They played with us. Elder Zixmoth stood slowly in the back of the chamber. His ancient robes rustled as he made his way to the central speaking platform. Every eye in the room turned to him as he began to speak. I tried to warn you, his voice carried across the silent chamber. But you would not listen. You thought the archives were just collections of old stories. He gestured to a holographic display that showed images from the battle. Wreckage floating in space where Kethavar's fleet had been. Human ships moving through the debris like sharks through water. These are not the primitive beings you thought you were conquering. Zixmoth continued. They are the Voidwalkers, the children of Deathworld Prime. They are the species we spent 10,000 years trying to forget. A ripple of fear went through the remaining delegates. Some of them were old enough to remember the stories their grandparents told. Tales of warriors who fought for the joy of battle itself, who turned space itself into a weapon. But how? Demanded the Crystalline Collective's representative. How could they hide their true nature for so long? Zixmoth activated the holographic archive, showing ancient records that made the assembled aliens recoil in horror, because they wanted to be hidden. The quarantine around their system was not a prison. It was a nursery. They have spent 10 millennia growing stronger, more advanced, more dangerous than they ever were before. Images flashed across the display. Human genetic modifications that violated every known law of biology. Technology that merged organic and mechanical systems in impossible ways. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space. The humans we just attacked are not the same species that was banished long ago. Zixmoth explained. They are what the Voidwalkers became after 10,000 years of isolation and evolution. They are our nightmare made real. Kethavar struggled to his feet, his broken voice carrying clearly in the silence. They let most of my ships escape. They could have destroyed us all, but they chose not to. Do you know what that means? The chamber remained silent. It means they want us to spread the word, Kethavar continued. They want the galaxy to know they have returned. They are not hiding anymore. As if summoned by his words, the main display activated on its own. The face of Captain Sarah Chen appeared, speaking from the bridge of her ship. But now the pretense was over. She wore the full uniform of a Voidwalker captain, and behind her, the bridge showed technology that made the Council's finest ships look like toys. Greetings, Galactic Council, she said with that same terrifying smile. I am Captain Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. I bring a message from Admiral Morrison and the High Command. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. For 10,000 years, you have enjoyed peace because we allowed it. You built your civilizations, expanded your territories, and grew comfortable in the belief that you were the apex predators of this galaxy. That time is now over. The display showed images of Earth's solar system, but not as the Council remembered it. Massive orbital shipyards surrounded every planet. Weapon platforms that could destroy entire fleets dotted the asteroid belt. And everywhere, ships that radiated power signatures beyond anything in known space. We do not seek conquest, Chen continued. We do not want your worlds or your resources. But we will no longer remain hidden while you treat the galaxy as your private hunting ground. Behind her, other figures moved across the bridge. Each one showed the genetic modifications that had turned humans into living weapons. Each one carried themselves with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat. The old rules are finished, Chen said. There will be no more forced relocations of primitive species. No more enslavement of developing worlds. No more treating sapient beings as resources to be harvested. She leaned forward and her eyes seemed to look directly at each delegate in turn. We are establishing new boundaries. Human space now extends beyond the Sol system. Any species that wishes peaceful contact will be welcomed. Any species that chooses aggression will learn why the galaxy once trembled at our name. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in dead silence. Elder Zixmoth spoke into the quiet. The archive contains over 3 million records of human military capabilities from the old wars. Ships that could destroy planets, soldiers who could survive in the vacuum of space, weapons that could turn stars themselves into ammunition. He looked around the chamber at the terrified faces of the galaxy's supposed rulers. That was 10,000 years ago, when they were young and primitive by their current standards. What do you think they are capable of now? The Hive Queen's representative stood up, her multiple voices speaking in harmony. What do they want from us?
Nothing, Zixmoth replied.
That is what makes them so dangerous. The old Voidwalkers fought for territory, for resources, for dominance. These new humans fight for principles we do not understand. They are not conquerors. They are something far worse. What could be worse than conquerors? Asked the Metallic Brotherhood's delegate. Judges, Zixmoth said simply. They have appointed themselves the arbiters of right and wrong in this galaxy, and their judgment is final. As if to prove his point, reports began flowing in from across galactic space. Human ships had appeared in dozens of systems where the local governments were oppressing their populations. Not attacking, just watching, observing, recording. On worlds where slavery still existed, human broadcasts began explaining the concept of individual rights to enslaved populations. In systems where primitive species were being exploited, human ships started appearing to offer protection. The galaxy's power structure, built over millennia of careful politics and military might, was crumbling in a matter of days, not because the humans were destroying it, but because they were offering something better. Admiral Morrison appeared on screens throughout galactic space, his elderly human face calm and reasonable as he spoke to trillions of beings. We do not come as conquerors, he said. We come as neighbors. For too long, this galaxy has been ruled by fear and force. Stronger species have preyed upon weaker ones, treating sapient life as a commodity to be bought and sold. His expression hardened slightly. That ends now. Not because we say so, but because the weak no longer have to stand alone against the strong. The broadcast showed human fleets taking up positions throughout the galaxy, not invading, not attacking, simply making their presence known. The message was clear. The age of easy conquest was over. Back in the council chamber, the remaining delegates sat in stunned realization of what had happened. In the space of a few days, humanity had gone from an unknown primitive species to the dominant power in the galaxy. What do we do? Someone whispered. Elder Zixmoth gathered his robes around him as he prepared to leave. We adapt, he said. Or we join the wreckage of every other species that thought they could stand against the Voidwalkers. As the chamber slowly emptied, the old archivist made his way back to his ship. He had much work to do. The galaxy would need to learn new ways of thinking, new ways of behaving. The humans had not conquered them through force, but through something much more powerful. Hope. For the first time in galactic history, the weak had protectors who could not be bought, corrupted, or defeated. The strong would have to learn to coexist rather than dominate. And somewhere in the depths of space, aboard ships that moved like ghosts through the void, human crews prepared for the long task of reshaping a galaxy. They had waited 10,000 years for this moment. The Void Walkers had finally come home.